Hi, my name is Jeff Davies. I'm the owner-operator of Cybernautics Studios here in Mesa, Arizona. And in this short tutorial, I'm going to cover the differences between textures and materials in Blender shaders and how they translate into iClone. This is going to be very important for future tutorials because it's all going to be based on this knowledge. So let's start with what is a shader. A shader is a general term for a type of texture in iClone and in Blender. A shader defines how an object will look when it's rendered. Does it look like freshly painted wood? Is it reflective or glossy at all? Does it have paint chips missing that expose underlying wood or metal or some other substance made up by you? In Blender, this is a little more involved because Blender recognizes not only regular shaders or materials based on textures, but it also recognizes completely procedurally defined shaders. More on that in a bit. Since texture-based shaders are simpler, let's start with them. So a texture is a shader that is based on a set of images. For our purposes, I will focus on PBR textures as they provide a more realistic look. PBR stands for physically based rendering. PBR is also one type of texture format used by iClone. If you come over here, main character creator, under the shader type, PBR, we also have traditional, and you'll see these channels of different types of images change. A reflection substance, a digital human hair, or this triple S. I'm going to cancel out of that, don't want to change anything. So let's go to PBR. So PBRs have, as you can see here, there's a base color, has an opacity, which may or may not be used, has a bump map or a normal map. This is actually a normal map. You can tell because it's purple and pink in nature. A true bump map is just grayscale. Then there's an ambient occlusion. This shows in general where there might be additional shading or grunge collected or something like that. Then we have metallic. For these things that are black and white, like opacity and metallic and even roughness, black means has none of that ability. So this black metallic means that it isn't black, it isn't metallic at all. Whereas the opacity, yes, the whole texture is opaque. For roughness, this is a grayscale. As you see, it's pretty simple. I don't know if you can see it on YouTube or not, but there's a little gray band towards the bottom of that. That's a lighter gray. That is going to mean that it is slightly rougher than the rest of it. And that's going to map to, I believe, the band on the top, although it could be the bands on the bottom by the legs. Then we have displacement maps. We have a glow channel. So if something is emitting light, that's going to be in the glow channel. Then we have a blend channel. The images used here are often 1K, 2K, or 4K in size. If we take a look at the base color here, you see at the bottom it says width 1024, height 1024. That is a 1K image. If it was 2048 by 2048, that would be a 2K image, and so forth. I have seen textures on the market up to 16K in resolution, but the need for such a high level of detail is extremely rare. You've got to be doing something like an entire planet. You're going to zoom in very close in order for 16K to make sense. Now, there are pros and cons to these image-based textures. First is the pros, they look very realistic. The second pro is that PBR works natively in iClone, as you can see here in Character Creator. Same holds true in iClone itself. The cons, these images tend to tile when they're scaled up. Now, there is a concept called a seamless image, where as it tiles, so the left side of the image maps to exactly the right side, so it doesn't look like there's an edge there. But even then, if you scale that up to a very high number, for example, you get a 1 meter by 1 meter plot of grass, and you scale it up to be 50 meters by 50 meters, odds are you're going to see patterns in what's called tiling. Tiling is when your eye can see the pattern in it and go, that's not right. That's not how 50 meters of grass looks. The other con is that high resolution textures of 4K and above can be very demanding on your computer when rendering. Now I'm due for a new computer. This is an older 2080 Ti is my graphics card. It can handle the 4K just fine, but there is a noticeable difference. The last con is that you still need to generate your own PBR materials from any existing PBRs so the textures map to your object correctly. This is often because the scale of the texture does not map to the scale of the object that you want to wrap in that texture. So what is a procedural material? Well, let's take a look at Blender. So here we are in Blender, and you can see I've got two different materials here, two different objects, I should say, or meshes. Each one of these meshes has a different shader associated with it. This one, this wood, is a completely procedural shader. This other one is also completely procedural. Both of these are completely procedural shaders, but I'm going to show you what they look like on the inside so you can see a little more detail. So let's start with the simple blue one here. I'm going to go to the shading tab, and you can see our shader at the bottom, very simple. It has what's called a principled BSDF, which is just a type of shader. I can control the color by just clicking on the base color. I can also do things like make it more metallic. I can reduce the roughness. As I do so, it becomes more reflective. You can see what's called the HDRI. If you don't know what an HDRI is, it's just a representation of what the environment would look like around. It has to reflect something. Right now it has nothing to reflect, so it reflects the HDRI of the environment. Now this is a very simple one, very easy to make changes to, but let's take a look at a more complex one. So this one is wooden flooring that I've got from Ducky 3D's Realistic Textures pack. There'll be a link to this in the description for the video. I don't have an affiliate link. I make no money off of recommending these different sources. So I recommend them because I use them and I like them. If we take a look here, this doesn't look too bad. You may go, okay, there's a UV map that goes into this crosswood flooring one that goes to material output. It doesn't look that much more complicated, but this is a grouping. Let me dive into this grouping in the crosswood flooring in the middle. And you can see what I'm talking about. This is what goes on into that procedural material. There's quite a bit going on. If you can use the procedural material as is, that's great. If you need to come in here and tweak any of these values, then you have to know what you're doing. So, pros. Procedural materials can scale infinitely. They never tile. Let's take a look at this one here, and let's scale it by 20 times. All right, so we scaled this by 20 times. As you can see, no difference. It scales just fine, no matter how large or small you make it. And that's because it's all done mathematically. It doesn't have any images associated with it. So let's scale that back down. Now let's take a look at an image in Blender that uses image textures. So you'll notice, let me get one on here first. Okay, so I added this bark texture or bark material, and as you can see now looking into the shader, it's using textures. These are marked here textures, which means an image. And there's an image that will go into the roughness, an image that goes into the base color, and lots of other images and things that go on. So this is really more of a texture. It still uses nodes. It's still technically a procedural shader because that's all that Blender uses, but it looks very similar in nature. These are the actual images. If you wanted to use this unchanged in iClone, you could just use these images directly. I'll show you in a future video a better way of doing that. Procedural materials can scale infinitely. They never tile. They're not as demanding on your computer when rendering because it's all just calculated. It's harder to make them look real unless you're an expert. So if you take a look at this wooden one here, that looks pretty real, and it's done by a real expert, Ducky 3D. He knows what he's doing. He can make this look realistic, the little grains in the wood and that sort of thing. You need that level of expertise if you're going to create these materials. Now, if you're just going to use them, you really don't need that expertise. However, if you want to use these in iClone or Character Creator, you have to convert them into a PBR material first. Once again, I'll cover that in a future video. It's going to be coming up pretty quick. If you do need to tweak the materials to your specific needs, that may require some specialized knowledge, as you can see, about Blender shaders. So if you don't have that specialized knowledge and you don't want to dedicate a significant amount of time to gaining that expertise, I'll just avoid that. You can still use them. All right, so which of these is the better option? That depends entirely on your needs. If you need a shader for a tiled floor, then a texture may be a great way to go because the tiling effect is perfectly acceptable. However, if doing a grassy field where tiling is not acceptable, a procedural material may be a better option for you just because it won't tile no matter how big you make it. So where do you get textures and materials? Odds are you just want to get quality textures and procedural materials and not have to dedicate your life to learning on how to make them. The good news is that there are many sources for both of these, both free and paid. I have put links to the top sites for both free and paid textures and materials in the description. So in conclusion, I've touched on the basics of using PBR materials in an earlier tutorial that had to do with tattoos in Character Creator. However, I will have a dedicated video coming up soon that covers some of the basic modeling concepts in Blender, along with procedural shader and how to export it into iClone. So you can really see how to use Blender to make things specific to iClone. Don't forget to like this video. It only takes a single mouse click and it really makes a difference in the YouTube algorithm for others to help find this video. Press the subscribe button if you want notifications about new videos like this when they're released. All right, and that's it. Thank you for your time. Bye.